Hi everyone, this is Rachel from SunBearGlassCraft and I have such an exciting video for you today. For today's video, it is going to be a follow along DIY of this Monstera leaf. I've created this pattern specifically for this video and it is available for free in my Etsy for digital download. You can do whatever you want with this pattern. You can make the leaf, you can sell the leaf once it's made. The only thing I ask is that you do not take the pattern and sell the pattern. I want the pattern to be free to anyone who wants to use it. I will be offering this leaf in my shop in the future, but this leaf specifically is also going to be a giveaway. In order to enter the giveaway, all you have to do is like this video, make sure you're subscribed, and also leave a comment down below. So if you're ready to go ahead and follow along and make this leaf with me, let's get into it. Before I cut my pattern out, I like to gather all of my glass that I think will look good together. For this Monstera leaf, I wanted a darker green with some transparent and white accents. I like to pull all of my large sheets out and grab my scrap bins before cutting and breaking the glass. I'll first go through my scraps to see if I can use any of them for the project, since it's better to use the small pieces first, that way I'm not cutting up the large sheets, because trust me, glass accumulates so much faster than you think it will. I come up with a general color layout in my drawing program and then I plan my glass from there. Oftentimes I will end up changing the color layout from the original idea, and glass planning does kind of take time and practice to get the right combination the first time. Now that I've figured out my glass colors and where they're going to go, I cut my pattern out. I have my pattern printed out on normal printer paper, which I'll be using as a guide while I'm grinding the glass, plus my cardstock version, which is what I'll be cutting out and tracing with Sharpie. To cut out my patterns, I like to use normal scissors to get the bulk of the cardstock off, and then I'll just use an X-Acto knife to separate the pieces. I tend to cut right on the black line, although if you're worried about the pieces being too big, you can cut on the inside of that black line. One of the fun parts about making a piece like this is the border isn't defined. Yes, there are edges to all of these pieces, but it's a leaf. You can make the pieces slightly bigger or slightly smaller, and it doesn't matter because it's a leaf and no one's gonna know the difference. Additionally, you can make this pattern more or less complicated depending on the look you're going for. I personally wanted to make a variegated Monstera leaf, but you don't even have to do that. Or you can add more variegated sections and make it super complex. It's so open-ended and you can just take this wherever you want. Now that I have all of my pieces cut out, let's go ahead and start tracing the pattern on glass. For this white piece right here, number 7, this is a perfect example of why I save all of my glass scraps. Do you see how perfectly that fits on that little scrap? There's a ton of pieces that I have that are super small and really can only be used for mosaics. I still don't know how to make mosaics, but one day I will. But it's really, really satisfying when you can find a piece like this that just fits perfectly. I like to keep silver and metallic Sharpies in general on hand and in stock because they are perfect for dark glass such as this, where you cannot see black Sharpie even if your life depended on it. Metallic Sharpies are also really nice to have because they're water resistant, so when you go to grind, it doesn't come off as easily as a black Sharpie does. I obviously didn't show all of my pieces being traced with Sharpie, but they are all ready to go, so next step is going to be to cut all of your pieces. I have a pencil grip cutter and I always like to make sure the wheel is nice and lubed up, and then I will cut directly on the Sharpie line, or you can also cut slightly inside of the Sharpie line if you're worried about the piece being too big. If you're using the tracing paper and glue method, that tracing paper can also act as a guide for cutting, which is really convenient. You'll always want to make your score line on the least textured side of the glass, and sometimes it's a little hard because there's some glass that is textured through and through. When I'm working with a glass that I know is very textured, I tend to break it with the back tap method. What this means is I will score the glass, flip it over, and lightly tap on the back in order to break it. These are not excessively hard or violent taps, but there have been times with really textured thick glass that I have had to kind of put some elbow grease into it, really put some force in, but generally it's just going to be light taps to deepen that score line until it breaks. For normal breaking, such as these tiny pieces, I like to use my grossing pliers, or also called breaking pliers. And what I do is I line up those pliers right on the score line and I will pull my hands apart. The only time that I apply an upward force with the hand that's holding the pliers is for really small pieces that I'm trying to break off. Once we've cut all of our pieces and gotten as much of the extra glass off of the outline as possible, we'll go ahead and prepare to start grinding. This step, whenever you line them up on the outline, always feels the most hopeless, but it'll get better. We'll grind it all down. The reason why you want to get as much of the glass off as possible that's not necessary is because you don't want your grinder to be doing that much work. If you're heavily reliant on your grinder, you are going to go through grinder bits like it's nobody's business. Really, the only purpose of your grinder should be to rough up the edges so the foil has something to stick to. Now don't get me wrong, there are exceptions. There is some glass that is so hard to break, and in that case I will rely on my grinder. It's better to grind little by little than take too much and then have to completely redo a piece. So as you can see here, I am tracing with Sharpie where I think I need to take some off. This was the first time I've ever worked with a glass bead, so you can see here that I am tracing what I can see through the bead, and then I just smoothed it out with my normal grinder, and it took me about 20 minutes. For some of the more concave pieces, I have this smaller diameter grinder bit, and I'm holding up a piece of ice just to wet it. You should never be doing this dry because it'll send glass dust everywhere and you can crack your glass. After we have all of our pieces smoothed out, we can go ahead and start prepping for foiling. I just have a little washcloth that I dampen with water, and I'll wipe all the glass dust off of the edges. That way the foil can adhere to the edges properly. You can also just rinse them in the sink, but make sure you have a little strainer in your sink so you don't drop them down the disposal like I have before. For the simplicity of this video, I hand foiled all of my pieces and I used 7/32 foil. I always start my foil on a flat inner portion of the glass. I never want where the foil ends to be visible on the outer part of the stained glass project because this foil can lift whenever you go to solder and it just kind of looks ugly. Whenever you're done putting the foil around the edges, next you'll crimp all of the foil, and I like to use a pinching motion like this. If you've watched my foiling tips and tricks video, you know that for concave parts, I like to warm up the foil with my finger just by rubbing it a few times, and this helps prevent cracking. I use this technique very often when it comes to my Monstera leaves because, as you can see, there's quite a few pieces that have concave parts to them. Now we need to foil this marble. I've never done a marble before, but this was actually pretty easy. So all I did was switch to 1/4 inch foil, and then I did 2 different layers. The first layer was to form a lip around the bottom part of the marble, and then the second layer was slightly higher, like I would say not even a millimeter higher, to create the foil lip on the top part of the marble. On the rounded upper portion, there was some foil around the edges that I didn't like, so what I did was went in with an X-Acto knife and cut out those corners. That way it looked uniform all the way around. I think it came out pretty nice. I like to burnish everything at the same time, so I went ahead and applied foil to all the pieces, and now I'm just going to go through and smooth out all the wrinkles. As you know, I like to do my edges first, and then I'll go in and smooth out the wrinkles on the faces of each piece of the glass. Once everything is burnished, we can go ahead and start soldering. I like to put my flux in this little bottle cap, and then I will just apply the flux to all the joints of the glass so we can tack everything together. I have my iron set to 410, and what I do is just take tiny little bits and tack everything together, that way it doesn't move around. Before you start soldering the rest of your piece, you'll want to apply a thin, even layer of flux to the entire leaf. You should have enough flux that everything has a nice even layer, but it's not drowning. Now we can officially start soldering to make everything beautiful. While I was soldering this leaf, I actually had my temperature set to 460, and I really enjoyed how quickly it allowed me to solder. After I solder the front and the back, that's when I'll add my jump ring. I make my jump rings with 16 gauge pre-tinned copper wire, and then I have these little jewelry pliers that I like to use to just mold it to the size and shape that I want. Before attempting to solder on the ring, make sure that you apply flux to the ring itself, and then also make sure that there's flux on the project where the ring is going to be soldered. For most pieces, and especially large pieces like this, please make sure that you're attaching the ring to a solder line itself and not an edge. This Monstera leaf is actually pretty heavy, so if you were to attach it to the edge, like on the top two leaves, it would not hold up. I always make sure to hold the ring just for a little bit longer after I've soldered it, that way the solder has time to cool and set and it doesn't move around. Now you can bead your edges before or after you apply your jump rings. I kind of change up when I do it, but for this video I saved it until the very last. As you can see, all I'm doing to bead the edge is grabbing a tiny little bit of solder, holding the leaf as level as possible for the edge that I am beading, and then waiting just a few seconds for that solder to set and cool. I did have my iron set to 360, and I actually just really don't like how hard it is to blend all of the solder together, so I bumped it up to 410 and had a much better time. Sometimes when you bead the edges, you can get these weird little pockets that form on the solder line, so anytime I'm done beading the edge, I'll go back and just double check, and then I'll smooth out any of those solder lines where it might look a little bit weird or bumpy or just have those little pockets. It is extremely important that after you're done soldering, you get all of the flux off. I personally use CJ's flux remover, and I use only purified water on every stained glass project. The reason for this is that tap water has a lot of extra minerals and just things in it that affect the solder and will affect how the patina looks. If you're getting really spotty, uneven patina, it could be because you're using tap water. So we'll give it a nice scrub, rinse it with purified water, and then dry it off in preparation for patina. Before applying patina, I like to abrase the surface of my solder. Now, some artists, I've heard they use like a really fine steel wool. I personally use a magic eraser because that's what I use to get my Sharpie off. Doing this really evens out your solder and makes sure there's no oxidation, so that way your patina is going to stick and be super beautiful. I cannot emphasize this enough for patina. You should never touch patina with bare hands. I double layer food safety gloves, and you can also use latex gloves if you have them available to you. To apply my patina, I just have a beach towel that I cut up into little squares. This beach towel has seriously lasted me a year, and I'm not even like halfway done with it. And then I put my patina in a little cup. I personally really like using these little sections of towel because I find that the abrasion that it causes really gets that patina nice and bright. You want to work relatively quickly whenever you're applying your patina because there are some colors of glass that, because of the contents that they have in them, The patina can actually cause this kind of rainbowy film or like a discoloration on the glass, and I noticed this a lot with gray glass as well as this like kind of deep tan glass that I have. I have designated corkboard squares for my patina, and I throw them out pretty regularly because I don't want chemical saturated corkboard just sitting around my art room. To clean your patina off, I personally use CJ's Flux Remover, and I give it a second bath after I'm done, and then I have a separate patina removing sponge. Our last step before finishing our piece is going to be to polish it. This is a super important step, and I actually see a lot of people not polishing their glass, but polishing your piece is going to not only make it extra beautiful and shiny, but it's going to protect it from oxidation and help it last longer. I use Leva polish to polish my pieces and then an old soft rag. So what I'm doing is I'm going to put the polish on and then evenly coat the entire piece and just let it sit for about 5 minutes once everything is saturated. Now you don't want the polish to be pooled up, you just want a nice thin even coat over the whole piece. You'll come back after about 5-10 minutes and there should be a nice dry kind of whitish coating covering the whole piece, and that's when you'll find a kind of clean part of your cloth and go to town and just really polish every part of it. Sometimes the cloth does have a hard time getting in small corners, so I'll go in with a Q-tip to get all of the little bits of wax out of the corners where the pieces meet. I generally recommend polishing pieces once a year or maybe a little bit sooner than that if you're in a super humid climate. Finally, you want to hang up your piece, so I personally braid hemp cord, and this is what I tie onto my pieces. But some people use chain, some people use fishing line. It's entirely up to you, whatever look you're going for. For my heavier custom pieces, I do use black jack chain, which is like really heavy duty outdoor chain. Now, before we're done, before we can officially say we're done, I will do a final quality control check before I officially show everyone and post pictures. You can see here that I am going in with a little X-Acto knife and just kind of gently scraping away some black buildup that happened just from soldering. Now ideally you should be checking for quality after each step. So after soldering, before patina, you should be checking to make sure all of your solder looks good, because it is not ideal to have to go back in and fix your solder after you've already applied your patina. But if everything looks good, then we are officially done. Now for the best part of every project is seeing what it looks like outside in the light. Alright, well I think that just about does it for today. I hope you guys loved this video. I would like to do more DIY videos in the future, so if you have any suggestions for how I can make this video better, or if you have any suggestions for free patterns that I can offer in future videos, please leave a comment down below. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like and consider subscribing, and I also have my Patreon and PayPal down below if you'd like to help support me in that way. I hope all of your projects are going well, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!